Welcome to my beginner's guide to goal line blitz 2 offense. I should have timestamps at the bottom because I think this might be a longer one, so feel free to jump around to what you're particularly interested in. But I will mention that this is meant to be watched in order, so jump around, but don't jump around too much. So this is supposed to be the first video of a two-part series that hopefully we'll get to. We're going to start with offense, and then where the second part will be defense in terms of just meta play calling. And after you watch the second part, it might be a good idea to come back and rewatch the first part because this series is going to assume that you know literally nothing. And because of that, if you're just now learning these concepts for the first time, after you learn the defensive concepts, some things about the offense will be more intuitive, so you might want to go back and revisit that. Because of that, I was actually debating which part to make first, but I think it makes sense to start with the offensive play calling. So with that, what are the objectives and goals of this? And while we do this, I'll be switching back and forth to this PowerPoint. Although this PowerPoint's empty, I have like 9 pages of notes next to me, and I'm just going to be filling it out as we go along because I think that's more engaging, and I didn't want to retype everything I had just written. So, that being said, objectives and intended end results. So a lot of new players joined recently, and a lot of you guys are kind of having trouble with like the CPU and whatnot, which I get. And I've kind of been saying just go to the Discord, but I've figured I might as well just make a simple video. And this is to catch you up with the meta offensively. It's going to be pretty basic, but more so basic concepts as opposed to the nitty-gritty of like player builds and offensive tactics to really catch you up to the meta and teach you what you need to just beat not only the CPU, but actually a lot of the coaches in this game because many of them just never get past the basics I'm going to be teaching on offensive defense. And this guy's going to be broken down into 5 lessons, which we will be typing as we go. And with that, one last thing, the obvious caveat of why should I listen to you, which is a very good point. So you might be wondering, am I the best player in the game? What's going on? Why would I listen to some frog? Or are you elite? No, I'm not the best player in the game, but I'm pretty good, and I don't think anyone would argue that I'm not at least decent at this game, and I'm kind of good at teaching things, I think, so I figured, why not me? And I do know someone who's an elite player at the game, good old 𝐜𝐲, I believe is the consensus #1, and believe it or not, at one point in my past, I was useful to him when he was just wee new and a noob at the game. Something I said in passing once, not really thinking much of it. Actually, it helped him a lot, which is crazy to think about. Kind of taught him the overall meta offense of the game unbeknownst to me, and now he's way better than me. Now I ask him all the questions. So hopefully I can do the same thing to you, and one day you'll be way better than I am, and you can help me out. And with that, let's get into lesson 1. So, lesson 1 here, the fundamental lesson that is so important. Ooh, that's not how you spell lesson. Like, that's not how you spell it either. That I think is so important to name lesson 1 is that tight ends are OP. That I knew it would be more engaging if I typed this live. There you go. Tight ends are OP. And how OP are you asking? I would say that it's actually fundamental that the tight end must be double covered. If not, you're just going to have a bad day. And understand that there are 2 types of defense in this game. In football, of course, there's man defense and zone defense. But really for this game in particular, you have to specialize in one just because they have limited skill points. And we're going to be focusing how to counter man defense with this introduction guide because zone defense is actually a good bit rarer and it's not a lot less intuitive. So of everyone who plays the game currently, maybe only about 12 know how to run a zone defense in a way that's effective or are capable of doing that. I have of those 12, about half of them run man. So there are a lot of people who are capable of doing it, but just run a man defense. And of those, like handful remaining, only one of them is truly, truly elite. And the rest are just like pretty good. And since you won't really be running into them statistically wise, in terms of a beginner's guide, I think we're going to focus on man defense more. Because if you have someone who's just running zone defense and doesn't really understand it, which will be most people, you'll like most of your passing plays that work against man will just work against them anyway. So you'll be set. So we'll be focusing on countering man defense really. And also I'm going to be making a lot of references to superstar players who are these gold star players here. What they do is they pretty much get a discount on every single trait, so they're very good, but you might not have access to them. So if you are in a situation where you don't have a franchise team, you don't have superstar players, you can replace them with prodigy players, which are these silver players here. It's a perk any player can get. And yeah, the same concepts will apply. So I do not joke when I say this. You can just throw to the tight end all game if they're not double covering them, and you will win. That being said, under the caveat, the condition that your tight end is built correctly. So you're going to really want to make sure you like engage with the community in terms of how to get a very good tight end build. And because of that, that may sound straightforward, but again, I'm going to build a playbook in a bit here. You're going to see that pretty much all of them are just throws to the tight end. And this right here is honestly like 50% of the game in terms of learning it as a noob. So what we're going to do here is that I'm going to build a playbook for you real quick. I'm going to put it to like times 15 speed so you don't have to sit through all of that. And after that, we'll see. I'll show you some concepts and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, and we're done with this highly questionable offense. So if we go to the pass medium, which is where all the plays are intended to be called for passing plays, you can see that a lot of them have tight ends in their name. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to go through and we're going to make sure we're either throwing to the blocking tight end or the tight end. And in formations where they have two tight end possible receivers, you're going to want to move your prodigy or superstar tight end, depending on which one you have, to the position that is going to be thrown. So, okay, we're just going to hit tight end here. Hit tight end here. I actually like that one. And the reason I like this one, corner strike, is because you don't want to really be throwing to like your halfback. So the fact that it has to cycle through all the wide receivers to get to the halfback is pretty good. Hi, it's me from the future here. Do not run corner strike. It's actually not that good. I was pretty tired when I made this, and it looks vaguely similar to an actual good play called shakes. I don't know how I missed that. Although the concept of cycling to your halfback and fullback last are pretty good because they probably can't catch the ball. Okay, back to the video. And actually, I'm going to move it to wide receiver 2 up here for the same reason. But for the most part, you see we're pretty much just going to spam the ball to the tight end. And believe it or not, that's actually going to be enough here. Yep, we're throwing, tight end. Such a bad influence. We're going to keep that one at wide receiver 1 too because I don't want the quarterback looking at the halfback and fullback who probably don't have as much investment into hands. So I'll start that one at wide receiver, tight end. Maybe I'll start this one at what? No. For the sake of it, I'm going to stick with tight end, and we're going to save that. And yeah, that's for lesson 1. I think that pretty much brings it to a close. We're going to return to this starter offense later on, but I think with that, we're going to get into lesson number 2. Okay, so I know I said we were ready for lesson 2, but so there are some things in lesson 1 that I didn't quite cover to the extent I would like to, or I wasn't quite as clear with. And a day has actually passed since then, so I've had some times to think. And one thing is I forgot to mention, that second bullet point there. I don't think that was there last time. Man defense does not like cuts. So you'll notice that all our routes we have lots of cuts. And I felt that maybe I was a little too versatile with the playbook. I wanted to keep it maybe more simplistic since this is really assuming that you know nothing, and I didn't want to throw too many plays at you, which is ironic, and because you can see in the top right corner I have some Discord messages. I asked the Discord what they thought would be kind of like the 5 plays they would spam over and over again if I held a gun to their head, and that'll give you an idea of where we're coming here. But also you see the plays on screen. These are 5 I picked that I think maybe you should start with these 5. You can see the other recommendations on screen for what other people in the community thought was pretty viable or would be good for beginner plays. And also, I was butchering my vocabulary. So skills, traits, and abilities are different things. And we're going to cover that. I know I said I wouldn't get into the nitty-gritty of player builds, and I don't intend to. But we're going to look at the difference between those 3 things. And we're going to also learn about why we're going to see how man defense not liking cuts affects how we build some players. So this is a tight end that I have based off a build given to me by a very good player called Bo Diddley. I've kind of gone off the rails with his builds here, but that's what it's based off. So all these numbers we have here that we can add and subtract, those are skills. And these down here are abilities. And traits are these things here. So you can see superstar is a trait. It's a trait that gives you a discount on skills. Not to be confused with abilities. So most of the time, since we're, like I mentioned, man defense does not like cuts, you're going to start off with this called a hard cut, this ability here. And it really is going to make all the routes you run with all the cuts that much better. And you can see something pretty much universally all receivers in this game will have is lots of route technique, so it can lose the receivers there. Now, that being out of the way, let me go back and check if wrong direction. Let me check to see. Okay, now I think we're kind of pretty much done with lesson 1. And you can see, feel free to go back and look at all these plays on screen again because these players are quite good. And with that, I've cheated. I've started lesson 2 a bit. So lesson 2, as you can read, is that now that we've established that tight end is our first tool, when you have one tool, everything starts to look like a nail. If you only have a hammer, I butchered that, but you know what I mean. So with that, we're going to expand to our halfback, our running back, and establish this as our second tool. This right here is my running back on my pro team. I actually have 2 teams, which we're going to get more into in section 3 of this video. And they call this guy the home run halfback, and he does a couple things. So if we go back to our lovely PowerPoint, you can see I have avoid the tags down there. And that's really a goal line blitz 2 specific thing. So we'll get into this on video 2. But defenses can do something called tag you, which is, it makes them very strong against either passes or runs at the disadvantage that they'll be weak to whatever they tag against. So if a defense pass tags you, they'll be very good at defending passes, but they'll suck at defending runs. And if you're only throwing to your tight end exclusively without running, you're going to get tagged. And that's going to make the team that's tagging you exceptionally strong at defending just one thing. So we must use our halfback to do inside runs and outside runs, and in particular with the outside runs. Let's see, do I still have that playbook around here? Please, playbook. I don't. Let me go find that playbook real quick. Okay, I'm back with the playbook. So 2 types of runs, obviously, outside and inside runs. Oh, I guess 3 off tackle. Maybe it's not obvious. So we're going to start with outside runs. So for starters, if they're double covering our tight end, which is assumingly a reason you could focus on run game more, you're going to want to do outside runs to the weak side typically because, you know, they have more of their resources concentrated on where the tight end is on the right side there. So weak side outside runs are your friends. So you see I have 2 there. But in this game in particular, screens are quite strong. So I put them all in a section of my playbook. Here it's pass short. And screen left in particular, they're all good. And weak screens are also pretty good if they're double covering your tight end or just in general, really. Screens are pretty good in this game. But the thing with outside runs is that they could work really well against man defense, or they could lose you yards. So there's kind of a risk factor in that, as opposed to inside runs. So inside runs are quite good in this game because you're pretty much always gaining yards, and running backs are pretty OP, arguably more busted than tight ends. And you're wondering, well, how OP could they be? So here is my running back, halfback. I call him the home run halfback, and you're probably thinking, well, that's a weird name, you know, baseball reference, this is football. Well, fear not. The reason I call him the home run halfback is that sometimes I just give him the ball, tell him to run up the middle, and he just scores a touchdown. And that might sound like nonsense, but here's some replays for you to get an idea what I'm thinking of. So just, I give him the ball, and a bunch of people should tackle him, but they don't. So because players like this exist, if you just run up the middle with them, the defense cannot pass tag you because you will just score every play or get 30 yards every other play because that's how strong halfbacks can be in this game. So what you're going to want to do is that in addition to throwing the ball to your tight end every play, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, not really, you're going to be giving it to your busted halfback who will be running up the middle, and provided you build him correctly, this is going to prevent teams from, well, just pass tagging you the entire time. They will have to be confused on whether you'll run the ball, whether you'll pass the ball. And of course, you can run the ball outside to exploit them if they start double covering your tight end, or really based on a plethora of formations they run. That's just one example. So let's see, which direction's my PowerPoint? Here it is. If the halfback is our second tool for those things we explained, it can avoid tags. The outside runs, particularly to the weak side, are really good at exploiting man defenses. Our third tool is the wide receiver 1. So your tight end and halfback are pretty much always going to be superstar players or prodigies if you don't have access to them. Your wide receiver 1 does not have to be. It can be. But really, the reason I say it doesn't have to be is that in this game, offense is generally stronger than defense, which might seem like a weird point to include. But because of that, if you're a normal or normie wide receiver, we call players that aren't superstars normies. If your normie wide receiver is up against some defensive player covering them in one-on-one coverage, your wide receiver is probably going to get open, even if that defensive player is built perfectly. Reckon your wide receivers are built somewhat well. You don't even have to be perfect. You have to just be somewhat well. And that's just how strong certain signature abilities like hard cut are in this game. And because of that, since your wide receiver is going to be most likely left in one-on-one coverage because, again, they're double covering the tight end, these 3 positions are all you really need to really cause a headache. Because let's review. You can't just bail out, defend the pass entirely with superstar halfbacks running around that will just score touchdowns if left unguarded. You can double cover the tight end, which a lot of people do, but then the wide receiver 1, who's built to be typically rather fast and could be a superstar on their own, they'll get open. So these 3 tools are really what you're going to use to give everyone headaches in this order of frequency. You're going to start with the tight end spam most often, then you're going to move to the halfback, which you're pretty much going to be doing inside runs, maybe like 60-40 in terms of offense, 60% pass, 40% run. And your wide receiver 1's going to make sure they don't get too comfortable double covering that tight end of yours. And you should be pretty much like a headache if you combine that with these passing plays. And if you're wondering what running plays should you do in terms of inside runs, fear not. Our playbook has some pretty good ones. So the diamond formation is really where you want to stay in terms of inside runs because you have 2 fullbacks. If your team only has 1 fullback like most teams, that other fullback will be a blocking tight end. So make sure they have a little bit of blocking. You also have a pistol big formation. Single back spread's really good because a lot of people spread out during 4 wide receivers, covering all the potential receiving targets, and then they're weak up the middle. And I also have one from single back trips, which we'll get to later in lesson 3 and 4 and potentially 5. And with that, I want to say that wraps up lesson 2, much shorter than lesson 1. And we'll see if I add something on to this one. I am once again back extending a session, and the reason I'm extending lesson 2 here is that it didn't quite sit well with me that I had examples of the concepts I was talking about for the running back, but not for any other position. So I have some film here, I guess we'll say, to show you I guess not exactly real life, but in the game, examples of some of the concepts I was talking about here. So this is my rookie team, Quest for the 5th ring, and we're going to see a passing play develop here. And I want to observe a couple things. So one, last chance for you, the team we're facing, they know what's up, and if I highlight my tight end here, you'll see they're covering my tight end right there, double covering him because they know that if not, I'm going to throw to him all game, and that's going to be a problem. But remember what I said about offense being stronger than defense. Eventually, if they leave your receivers in one-on-one coverage, they're going to catch the ball. And here we have another example, and this one's at a higher level. This is the pro level, and this is particularly impactful example because we're going to be throwing to wide receiver 1 up there. I'll circle him or something. And my wide receiver 1 here is just a normal guy. He's not a superstar. He's not a prodigy. If the page would ever load, you'll see. And he's going up against a superstar cornerback. A superstar cornerback built by a very good player. But again, offense in this game is just stronger than defense. And you're going to see the hard cut signature ability fire. And even though, obviously many things happen for a play to be successful, right? But the fact that that can happen at all shows why if a team double covers your tight end and you have another tool in the form of a strong wide receiver, you're going to be fine. It doesn't shut down your entire offense. And here we actually have examples of the person we've been talking about all video, the tight end, because I thought it was quite ridiculous that I didn't show off the nonsense this guy will do. So this is, again, the rookie team, and we're just going to show examples of why, like, you just, if they don't cover the tight end, just literally throw to them all game. And there are a million of these, right? There are so many, and I believe this might be a CPU team. I don't know, but the point is, you see what happens when you just leave them open. I believe I have one other example here. This is at the pro level, and there's Shakes, that play we were talking about, and this is really impactful because here they actually do double cover the tight end. It just doesn't matter. The hard cut fires, and he's gone. It's so important to have a well-built tight end, wide receiver one, and halfback. Quarterback's okay, but honestly, you could build a trash quarterback and be fine. In fact, people think I build a trash quarterback, and I'm still fine. So with that, I think we can officially bring this section to a close. Lesson number 3 out of 5. This marks the halfway point. Before we jump into lesson number 3, something to highlight is that while we were gone, a germ, who goes on Discord, goes by a different name, Breaking Dad, has rolled in on some plays he loves. And you can see he too is a believer in the tight end spam, as is most of the game. So there we go. Just wanted to update that since he wasn't there for the rest. But it is lesson number 3. And lesson number 3 is going to be the principles of roster building. So this is something so important that we're actually going to see it both in the man defense, oh my goodness, in the offense section of this video and the defensive section of this video. And when it's all said and done, I might take those two parts out and make them their own section because overall roster building is so important. So first up, you might be wondering, you keep mentioning all these superstar players, and how come we don't just make every player a superstar? And we will be reviewing that by looking at some of my teams. Well, the short answer to this is that all teams must have at least 36 players. Let's see if I typed that up right. So we'll take a look at some of my teams for this. Okay, behold. Here we have my rookie team, Quest for the 5th ring. We've come off to a pretty nice 5-0 here, pretty nice start. And here we have my pro team, Atlanta University Center. This is in a elite league, so for those you don't know, they take all the better players and they throw them in one league and make them fight each other. So a little bit steeper level of competition here, and we've had some adversity, as you can see. We've had a loss, but we're going to be analyzing these rosters to help answer our question. So I mentioned that all teams must have 36 players. And this is relevant because the superstar players are much more expensive than every other player. And if you make every player a superstar, every player a prodigy, you just won't have the cap space in your team's salary, your budget, to fit every player. So because of that, you have to be strategic with what player you put where. So you can see on my rookie team, I have 4 superstars. But a better example, I think, is my pro team with only 3 superstars. And 3 superstars is all you need. Where's that PowerPoint? There it is. So I'm going to write that down. 3 is all you really need. And any more than 3 is just kind of, you can do it. You can do 4, but 4 is greedy. So you'll notice my rookie team does actually have 4. But before we get into that, let's look at the positions we chose to make superstars. The tight end, of course, if you've learned anything this whole video, should be the tight end is busted. The running back, we analyzed that as tool, our second tool. And even though the wide receiver 1 in particular, is very important, you see that I do not have it starred on my pro team. And that's because, as you remember from the previous section, that even if you don't really need a superstar wide receiver to get open and make plays, even if the cornerback defending them is a superstar. It's just not necessary. They're too good. But like I said, my rookie team, that's not where my rookie team lives. My rookie team actually does have a superstar wide receiver. Not just because you really don't need it. You only really need 3 to be most confusing. But it just makes things easier. It just makes the offense overall way more strong. But it's overkill, quite frankly. And you're wondering, like, why, if we have the salary space, why don't we just put a bunch of superstars on offense, even though if you don't need it, isn't a stronger offense better? But remember, offense is generally stronger than defense. So because of that, you're going to want to load up your defense with a bunch of superstars, a bunch of prodigies. And this isn't just my teams. You'll see this across the game. So on both my teams, most of my salary is spent buffing up my defense because we need all the help it can get because, again, offense is generally stronger than defense. And while I accidentally clicked this tab earlier, but humble brag, here's my rookie league. And look at that. The second player, third player, and the fifth player in the offensive superstar race are all mine. So very simplistic sounding techniques, but when employed, they actually do work, which I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's a thing. So we're going to look at the notes real quick and keep filling out our PowerPoint slide. Last note we have to touch on here while we're talking about the roster is contracts and chemistry. So not all contracts are made the same. If we go, wrong direction again, we'll look at my pro team. So you can see that I have my players on medium contracts and some on low contracts. And you might be wondering why put anyone on a low contract. Isn't that, well, first off, what's the difference between low and medium? So a low contract will be capped at 50 chemistry. And you can see that bar on the far right, that's orange, that is chemistry. And chemistry is actually really important for offense. Defense too, but you really see the effects on offense in terms of receiving. Players with lower chemistry just cannot catch the ball. They mess up blocking assignments. And that's because chemistry is supposed to affect how well you work together. And if on a medium contract, you can reach 100, but low contracts, you're stuck at 50. And you might be wondering, like, well, low contracts suck. Why'd you ever go to 50? Because if you put some players on a low contract, you can fit in more superstar players. And superstar players are so good that that's worth the trade-off. Also, if you put your team on high contracts, which you don't really see these days, but high contracts actually give a buff of, I believe, a plus 25 heart. Might be something else. I should know this. But you really won't see that because it's better to have most players on a medium contract and get more superstars in than have people on high contracts. But if you're in a scenario that you don't have a franchise team because you didn't feel like playing it, but you have access to a lot of players and you have the roster space, it would definitely be worth using high contracts. And I believe that's all I had for lesson 3 here. Shorter than the others, but also definitely very important to understand roster building, why all the good teams, or really most of the teams, put so many superstars on defense, and that it's because your offense doesn't need too many superstars to function. And with that, I think that actually wraps up lesson 3, easily the shortest lesson in the video. I lied, I'm back. What, you thought I would actually finish a lesson without adding something on? Are you kidding me? Have you been paying attention? Of course not, but I've wanted to add in that 4th bullet point that I'd written down but didn't type. And it's really that balancing and choosing which positions deserve a superstar player whilst managing the roster is the core to effectively building a roster and roster building at all. And although this is the offensive section of this video, and this is why I said this needs its own video, because it's really like you can't talk about roster building with only talking about the offense when defense is a huge part of it. But just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, so my pro team here is a zone defense, right? So because of that, I feel like it's a little bit weak to inside runs at times. So that's why I made sure I had a superstar defensive tackle and a prodigy, defensive tackle as well. The reason I didn't want to make 2 superstar defensive tackles is that I want all my superstar players on the field like as much as possible, so I'm getting the most out of them for the salary cap I spent. And sometimes I use formations that will have only 3 defensive linemen. In those formations, I'm using only 1 defensive tackle. So I didn't want to have a superstar player potentially just not on the field because of how much money they cost. And concepts like that and choosing what you will need for what you're trying to do is really how you will build rosters. But that's a whole different video, and we'll go over more on defense. Probably gets its own video entirely later on with members of the community. Okay, now it's done. Welcome to lesson number 4, and the end of our tutorial draws near here, but that's okay, because lesson number 4 is to pass and run the ball out of the same formations. An odd-sounding one, but an important one, I assure you. And also, I noticed this last slide said principles of roster. It was supposed to be principles of roster building. So some bullet points we're going to say. So the defensive playbook is organized by wide receiver count. And we're going to take an example of what that looks like. But effectively, long story short here, if you only pass out of certain formations and run out of other formations, you'll be very easy to counter thanks to the tags. And I will also put any offense that fails to do this. Let's see. What's a word that implies doom? Will fail. No, that's too intense. Will suffer. I think that's fair. So let's take a look at this defensive playbook I'm talking about. Okay, here we have a defensive playbook. First thing, this defensive playbook is a hybrid example I was testing with. So you'll notice it has zone and man defense plays. Yeah, most defensive playbooks are not like that. And neither will yours be when we get to that part in part 2. Choose either man or zone because it's pretty much impossible to get them both to work, although people have done it in the past. But as you can see here, the sections of our playbook are organized by receiver counts. And receivers refers to wide receivers specifically. So if we look at what this looks like on the offensive side of things, so big I formation, PA tight end seam there, that would be one wide receiver because one wide receiver. This goal line play would be 0 wide receivers. These I form plays would be 2 wide receivers. Then even though the tight end is running a route and is really like a receiver on this play, it is organized by wide receiver count, okay? And even these are 3 wide receivers in the pistol formation there. These with 2 tight end are 2 wide receiver, but a special variant that get their own section. They're 2 tight end big D, which you'll see. I mean, we're on it right now. And keeping this in mind, it would make no sense. So you can see, I don't know if you caught on to it while I was making this playbook. So I pass out of 1 wide receiver, 0, a bunch of 2 wide receiver stuff, some 3 wide receiver stuff, some 2 tight end big D stuff, and we have single back trip, so 3 wide receiver stuff, and then some more 2 wide receiver, 2 wide receiver. And if you look at the plays we're running out of, we run out of 2 wide receiver, we run out of 2 wide receiver with 2 tight ends, so 2 tight end, and then we run out of 3 wide receiver trips. So our run plays correlate with our passing plays. That way we don't get exploited. And even if you look at our screens, it wouldn't make sense to put a play like we're in single back spread. Well, it wouldn't make sense to put a play like this in, right? Because we have nothing else out of 4 wide receivers, and it's going to get pretty easily exploited. And also, the reason plays are good is because they synergize with other plays. So if you remember, the reason the rest of our screen plays are good, so these screens to the weak side, is because it exploits people who might be trying to defend our passing plays. And an example of what this will look like is one of these tabs. This one. So here we have a scrimmage game against a pretty good player in 𝐩𝐸, actually very good. I don't know why I'm downplaying him. And what you see here is that we're going to have a screen pass. Now, again, this is a scrimmage, so 𝐩𝐸 wasn't up all night planning things, but his default tactics that he has put in, or whatever defense he has plugged in, is indicative of what you'll see throughout this game. And for 2 wide receiver, you see he is running a play called man base. And man base, what it does is, as a passing play develops, it results with the tight end getting double covered. So the 𝐩𝐸, not being around for a bit, he knows what he has to do if he wants to stand a chance against any passing game. He has to smother the tight end so that he can't catch the ball, and he'll stop my offense, and I'll be all upset. So me knowing this, in my default playbook, I have a screen to the left side. And this is only effective out of plays or formations where I know my tight end's getting double covered. And since I have them both out of the same wide receiver count, which is the overall points of lesson number 4, the person I'm up against can't defend everything, so they have to kind of just pick and choose. And here we're going to see what happens when you choose wrong. And the fact that you make people have to choose what to do by putting multiple things in the same wide receiver set because they can't defend everything. So here, as this play develops, it's a pretty basic one, but you're going to see we're going to have an asymmetry in defenders. There are 3 defenders up top, and there are 2 defenders at the bottom because those 3 defenders are supposed to be 2 on the tight end and 1 on a wide receiver, but the tight end's blocking, so they all run to that poor wide receiver over there. And now we have... you see that so many resources are up at the top of the screen there that they don't have enough to adequately stop my good old running back, and he's going to score there. So that's like kind of 2 concepts in one. That's why a wide receiver count matters. And it's also what you do if your tight end's getting double covered, as we talked about earlier. And now with that, I believe we are ready for lesson We have arrived at the final offensive lesson I have for you. Lesson number 5. Lesson 5 is not nearly as straightforward as the others. You can think of Lesson 5 as an extension of Lesson 4, or perhaps a more in-depth version. The final part of this guide is intended to be watched last, and that is because it is in principle different from our previous lessons. We have reached the point of entering my personal philosophy and strategy of running an offense. Many watching will disagree with me, but our first point of Lesson 5 is that Goal Line Blitz is not a solved game. The changelog updates every season. Vague principles are understood, but overall everyone is still experimenting constantly. The game is a constant mixing of personal ideas, theories, philosophies, etc. As you continue playing, you will encounter every player has their own version of Lesson 5. Many of them will contradict each other. I advise you to learn from everyone, keep what you like, and discard the rest. It is possible you hear what I'm saying in our conclusion lesson and disagree. This is okay. If you can understand and implement the teachings of Lesson 5 into your offensive coaching, I will have nothing left to teach you in terms of strategy. You will have graduated from the 4chan School of Offense, and you'll need to seek out more advanced teachers. They're out there, and they're happy to teach you, but it is on you to find them. With that, let us begin. Lesson 5 is different because it is the stage where we deal with other people who are actively trying to game plan against us. Take a look at this play. If you were forced to pick, would you say it's good or bad? When looked at as a strictly one-on-one comparison to other inside run plays, this play seems rather bad. And in fact, it is. Why not just use a play out of a 2 wide receiver formation with a fullback, or even a diamond formation with 2 fullbacks? And yet, despite this play being somewhat underwhelming, I run it. So why would you put a bad play in your playbook? Vigilant students who recall Lesson 4 might suggest, perhaps I want to include a play like this because I plan on passing out of the 3 wide receiver formation. Pass and run out of the same formations after all. This is true, but not the entire answer. If you are facing a formidable opponent, Lesson 4 logic says, by including a play like this alongside passes out of the 3 wide receiver formation, a strange thing happens. In comparison to a strategy that only passes out of 3 wide receiver and only runs out of 2 wide receiver, although you may not get as many yards per inside run at first, you would be more successful over the long term. Over the course of many games, as data begins to accumulate, patterns will become more obvious, and an offense like that would be easily exploited. Do not think of running a successful offense as a battle of individual games, but as a long-term strategy of monitoring the data on your team's tendencies over the course of a season to confuse and manipulate defensive coordinators. To learn how to do this, you will need to realize that the better coaches of this game understand Lesson 4. It is because we pass and run out of the same formations that we can do both successfully. The existence of one offensively balances out the other. Existing individually in separate formations, neither passing nor running will be viable against a team that has scouted your history. It is the balance between the two that allows them to be viable. The point of our play is not to gain yards, but to win a championship in the long term by making our team more difficult to scout. There is a quote from a Japanese philosopher found in the Book of 5 Rings about walking of all things that I feel describes this point. Paraphrasing, the quote is roughly as follows. The ancients tell us to walk in a manner of yin and yang. When you step forward, backwards, or sideways with one foot, the other foot is not to be considered apart from the whole. When you take a step forward, the point is not to just move your foot, but to move your entire body in a direction. An incorrect way of moving the feet will eventually cause you to trip and lose balance. The passing game balances the run similar to how your left foot balances the right one. When we put a play into our playbook, we analyze it not just as an individual piece in terms of how many yards it gets us, but how it balances the overall makeup of our team, how it moves the entire body. This was Lesson 4. We can use the better players' understanding of this against them and bait them accordingly by intentionally leaving some aspects of our offense unbalanced and then fixing it for the harder games. Do you have 3 easy opponents and then a difficult one? Perhaps for the 3 easier games, you should only use the 4 wide receiver formation for long passes, and then spam single back spread inside runs against your more challenging opponent. An offense that ignores Lesson 4 to a seasoned defensive coordinator is like a carrot on a stick, an opportunity even the best players in the game will jump at. In other words, it's easy bait. This is how you beat the best players in the game. Setting long-term traps over the course of seasons to lure opponents into a false sense of security. Hanima once avoided the 3 wide receiver formation all season just to use it against 𝐸𝐵𝐻 in the championship game, which he won. Let's take a moment to let that sink in. Including ladder matches, the championship game is the 31st game of the goal line blitz season. That was an offensive trap with 31 games of bait. An extreme example, but long-term offensive strategies like this are how you're going to beat the best. I'd recommend setting your offensive traps around 5 games ahead of time, only after you're able to successfully implement the other lessons. The concepts of this video will help someone new to the game, but they are limited, equipped with their own flaws and shortcomings. You will eventually reach the limitations of them. For this reason, I'll leave you with one last quote. You must understand the limitations of the tools you are using before you can use them well. This video was made with the intention of a part 2 for defense being released sometimes afterwards. If that video does eventually come, it'll most likely require collaboration from other members of the community, so it might be a while. With this, I'll officially graduate you from the Frog School of Offense. Feel free to come back as an alumni and teach a couple classes anytime. Later, friends.